Marriages work best when there's two people who've decided and committed to be in a submission competition.
For as long as I feel like it.
For forever.
There's a lot of things to do around here.
I know.
For the kids.
I need you helping me in the yard.
For the kids.
Oh, for the love of.
For the love.
For someone else. For each other.
For the past.
For the future.
Well, everybody, it's so good to see you. Thanks so much for being here today and for being a part of this local church. I'm so glad that you've decided to spend some time with us today. And we got to celebrate My Life, which was awesome. And today we're kicking off a brand new series, like Annie said, called Tighten the Knot. This is a series all about marriage. So before we even get started, here's just what I want you to know. If you are not married, you're hoping to be married, like Annie said, you're like, yeah, been there, done that. No more for me. I'm good. Maybe you're in high school and you're here. Welcome all of our high schoolers. Buckle up. Today's series is for you. I think it's going to be helpful, whether you've been married way longer than I have. Maybe you're brand new to getting married. No matter where you're at in your experience or relationship to marriage, I think that this series is going to be very helpful for you. But I just want to specifically talk to the people that are married in the room. Here's what you and I both know. My wife and I have been married for 10 years, which is such a gift to me. My wife is you can clap for that. Cool. There we go. My wife and I have been married for 10 years. She is such a blessing to me. And I, of course, am a blessing to her. And we are two imperfect people. That's just what's true about us. Here's what I want you to know is nobody just goes, oh, you get to be a lead pastor because your marriage is perfect. Spoiler alert, our marriage isn't perfect. There are definitely things that are difficult about our marriage in the same way that there are things that are difficult about your marriage. And here's just what I also know is that when you decided to get married, especially for those of you that are married, maybe even newly married, you had this huge vision and you were so excited about what marriage was going to look like, and you were so pumped about, your wedding day. You spent so much time planning it. Maybe you spent a lot of money on it. Maybe you could have bought a house with the amount of money that you spent on your wedding, and you're like, we should have done that. That was probably a better usage of that money. I don't know what your story is. I don't know what your relationship is with marriage, but here's what I do know is that if you are married, you have experienced things that are difficult, and you have experienced things that whether you realize it or not, even though you tied the knot and you were so in love and so committed to your spouse, there were things that came along the way that have maybe made things a little bit more difficult. And maybe you're in a place now in your marriage where you'd say, man, we made it through the wilderness. We could sing the song. You've made it through the wilderness. You've made it through, and you're in a really great place now. Or maybe you're sitting here today and your marriage is like just on that tipping point, and you're like, today might be the day that I decide that I'm done. I don't know where you're at in that, but I want you to know that this series is not to step on your toes. This marriage is to encourage you and to hopefully help give you some hope and excitement about what could be and what could be in the future. If you're single, maybe you're divorced, you hope to be married again, my hope is that this series would be encouraging for you, that it would be helpful, and that it would give you a hope for the future as well. Being a pastor, I get to perform a lot of weddings, and I just have to let you in on a little bit of a thing, and I hope this doesn't offend you. I hate weddings. I really don't like them. I just don't like them. I don't like parties. I'm not a very fun person, not a big fan of weddings. If I did your wedding, I loved it. I loved it. It was so much fun. Thank you for inviting me to that. But here's this really funny thing that I've learned over the past couple of years is we love unity ceremonies, okay? This is like a new thing that's kind of an old thing that's become a new thing, but we're getting really fancy with them. I've done some weddings where, one person carried in a certain color sand and then poured it in a jar, and then the other person carried in some sand and poured it in a jar, and that meant They were getting married, so we're grateful for that. Then we did the candle one, where people bring lots of fire into the ceremony, which is always concerning because the groomsmen have always had a little too much to drink ahead of time. So there's that. There's lots of different ways that you do this. And so when I sit down with a couple and I'm like, hey, you're about to get married, I'm going through my checklist, and I ask them, are you doing a unity ceremony? Are you doing some kind of a thing? Are we doing the sand thing, the rope thing, the macaroni art thing? Like, what is it we're doing? And about a couple years ago, I was officiating a wedding for some friends of mine, and I was kind of making the joke, like, what kind of unity ceremony are you doing? And they said, oh, we want to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I was like, that's hilarious. And like, no, seriously, that's what we're going to do. And I was like, okay. And I said, is that, Tyler, because you're really sweet, and Amanda, because you're nuts? And she said, actually, no. And I learned that wasn't a great joke, but then they thought it was funny afterwards. So I've literally done weddings where, to show and symbolize the unity of these two people coming together, they made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut it in half, and then ate it. But the one that we see a lot, and it's connected to our series, is knot tying, or it actually comes more from a Celtic tradition called hand fasting. That's something that people did a long time ago, where when they would get married, they'd put their hands together and somebody would tie a rope around it. And it was to symbolize these two lives coming together and becoming one. And really, before the hand fasting tradition was a tradition to symbolize two people coming together, all of that was anchored in this idea that we find in the Old Testament. It's talking about two people coming together. And for those of us that are followers of Jesus, it's not just about two people coming together. There's a third person involved, and it's the person of Jesus. That when we enter into covenantal marriage as followers of Jesus, there's three of us involved in this relationship. This verse that supports this hand tying and the knot tying thing that we see at some of these weddings is found in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. I'm going to read it to us really quickly. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help them up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. If two lie down together, they will keep each other warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. Here's the big one that you probably heard this at marriage ceremonies before. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. When you tied the knot, if you're a follower of Jesus, when you tied the knot, it wasn't just a commitment between you and your wife or you and your husband. It was a commitment that you made with God and before him, that you would say, hey, there's 3 of us in this relationship that we're going to hold tightly to one another as we hold tightly to you. And throughout this series, we're going to embrace the fact that God designed marriage. This was his idea. He knew, and all the way back in Genesis chapter 2, that it was not good for man and woman to be alone, and he knew that they would need one another. But here's just what's true for me and for you, is that you and I are vastly different people. My wife and I could not be more different. We like different stuff. We think differently. Our personalities are so incredibly different. And so if that's true for you, you probably have been in a scenario where my wife and I were in pretty early on in our marriage, where we would say, hey, you know what? We tied the knot. We did the thing. Achievement unlocked. We are married. The ring is on the thing. We had the honeymoon. Now what? And maybe you've been there before. Maybe you're there right now and you realize that sometimes just falling in love is really, really great, but that falling in love and staying in love are two vastly different things. That falling in love sometimes takes not as much effort as staying in love, because you have probably figured out something that was taught to me many years ago, that falling in love takes attraction. Falling in love only requires attraction. Oh, he cute. Right? That's all that it takes, or you see the woman walk in that you decided to marry. Like my wife, she walked into Four River Smokehouse. I was cutting brisket, and she walked in, and it was like time stopped in its tracks. I was covered in meat sauce. And she wanted to meet me somehow, and we didn't. I forgot my name, and she had to find me on Facebook later. But whatever your story is, right? There was this instant attraction. You saw the person, you're like, that might be the person for me. But you realize, because life got hard and kids showed up and finances got tight, or addiction entered the scenario for you, or I don't know what your story is, but you realize very quickly that attraction on its own is not enough. And that to really be able to sustain a marriage, that attraction's a great thing to start with, but that you and I, if we're going to stay in love, it's going to take a lot more than that. It's going to take action. That staying in love is all about action. Really, this series, when we're talking about tightening the knot, not just tying it, if you tied the knot, congratulations, but what we want to do is we want to tighten it. We want to make that union, that connection that you have stronger. Because you and I need to understand that falling in love only requires attraction, but staying in love is all about action. And the couples that I have had the privilege, people that are older than me, that I've had this unique privilege to be around throughout my life, what I've seen from them is they have owned this very simple idea that what first comes naturally, they do intentionally, and they do it regularly, and they stay committed to it. All of the things that served them well when they were dating, they continued on, and they had a plan for it, and they stuck to it regularly and religiously. You know this. When you first started dating, you were just in awe. You couldn't believe it. The second that the phone chimed and they called you or you got a text, you were so excited. You're hanging out with your girls, like, he texted me. And now you eye roll. You're like, oh, what? Well, you know, right? Some of you have a unique ringtone for your wife when she calls. It's like, oh, no. You shouldn't have laughed that loud, man. I'm just saying. But you know that this is true. Early on in marriage, all these things, we just feel all the things. And then life happens and it gets in the way, right? But the couples that last, the couples that really last, and they don't just survive, they thrive. They understand that what once came naturally has to become something that they do intentionally. Very simply, they need to make love. Anybody? It goes in the blank? Thanks. That's great. Last service, some guy in the back goes, a lot. We need to make love a verb. So he was right-ish, I was like, is that going to be in the recording? Probably. We need to make love a verb. Love can't just be something we feel. It has to be something that we do and invest in on a regular basis. A very, very wise theologian once said, Toby Keith, a little less talk and a lot more action. This is at the epicenter of a healthy marriage. What he was talking about in this song is being intentional inside of your marriage. You and I, when it comes to our marriages as well, it's not going to take us just tripping and falling into love. It's going to take intentionality. It's going to take a plan. And if God made it, if God designed marriage, if he's the creator of it, then don't you think that it's important for us to know what he says, not just about falling in love, but staying in love. And that's what we're going to be talking about over these next 3 weeks. Today is kind of like a kickoff and an overview for me and for you. Week 2, I'm going to talk directly to the men. And week 3, women, if you will allow me, I'd love to speak directly to you and encourage all of us in our marriages to not just tie the knot, but to tighten it. Paul had a lot to say about love, and Paul was such an interesting and unique person because he actually didn't really spend time with Jesus. He knew a ton of people that did. He had the opportunity to be around a lot of people that were a part of the early followers of the way, and he knew so much about how Jesus lived, what he taught, how he thought, and it impacted all of the letters that he wrote, including the one that we're going to look at today in Philippians. Paul is instructing the early church on how they ought to love one another. Now, this passage is not a passage about marriage. This passage is a passage for all of us who've decided to follow Jesus. But man, if we would apply these truths to our marriage, it would radically transform the way that your home operates and the way that your marriage thrives, not just today, but for the rest of your life. This is what Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others before yourselves. Again, Paul is writing this letter. He's not just writing it to married people, but goodness gracious, married people. If you really love the person that you're with, it might be good for you and I to take this into consideration. And just really quickly, if you're someone who's in the room and you're not a follower of Jesus yet, but you're married, I am so glad that you're here. I'm so incredibly glad that you decided to show up for a marriage series. But here's just what I want you to know is that so much of this is great advice for you, but it's not really something you've been commanded to do. In fact, if you're not in a marriage that is centered on Jesus, you're in a marriage that is really hoping for the best. It's a gamble, really. Because if you haven't anchored yourself to Jesus inside of your contractual marriage, you're really just banking on good looks, good vibes, good personality, good sex, good home life, good luck, right? It's a gamble. And some of you have experienced the negative outcomes of that gamble. And if that is true for you, I want you to know that I believe that Jesus loves you and is for you and with you, and his heart breaks because of what you have experienced and that didn't work out or that it's not working out right now. But my hope is that this message, that it encourages you to maybe for the very first time anchor your marriage to something stronger than just good looks and good personality and good home life, that you would anchor it to something more firm and more solid so that that knot can stay tied for the rest of your life. Let's go back to what Paul wrote. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others before yourselves. We know how to do this, but we don't do it well all the time. If you've ever been to a wedding, you know when the bride walks in, what happens? Everybody stands up because in that moment, we're going to decide to value that woman above ourselves. We're going to stand up. When you walked into the wedding, nobody stood up for you. But in that moment, we're going to choose to value the bride above ourselves. At the reception on the back end, there was a line to shake the groom's hand and meet the bride, right? We're going to value somebody else above ourselves. My goodness, inside of marriages, it's so difficult sometimes for us to do this, because here's what's true about me and you is that we got our stuff. We have the things that we want, and we have our preferences, and we have our rights and the things that we like, and we have our interests, and we have our needs. And Paul understood that that's not just true in our human relationships, it's especially true in our marital relationships. And Paul would say that if you want to have a healthy marriage, a vibrant marriage, you're going to have to choose to reject selfish ambition and vain conceit, that you're going to have to make yourself less to make somebody else more, to value somebody else more than yourself. It doesn't mean that you need to reject your individuality. It doesn't mean that you need to just be a doormat. That is not what Paul is saying. Paul is not saying that you need to think of yourself as less. He just says that you need to think about yourself less. Sometimes that's really difficult for us. But we know how to do it. For some reason, when it comes to our marriages, we just have a really hard time with it. Paul goes on and he says, when it comes to the things that you're interested, that if we're going to be inside of a healthy marriage, that we need to not look to our own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. This just very simply means that when it comes to your marriage and your spouse, that you need to make their deal a bigger deal than your deal. I'm going to say it again, don't poke your spouse. Here's what this means. It means that you need to make their deal a bigger deal than your deal. And you know how to do this. You did this so well when you were dating. The girl you liked, the girl you were dating, she's like, I love to run. And you're like, I'm a runner. I run. I do running. I can do running. And all of a sudden, you're running to the store and you're buying Hokas for the first time, and you're like, why am I doing this? And all of a sudden you're running. Or golf. Ladies, maybe your husband was into golf and you're dating and you're like, golf's my favorite thing. I do it all the time. I'm not going to do it today. I'll ride in the golf cart, but I'm also really good at it. You did it. You took on the interests of your spouse. You pretended to like some stuff that you didn't even like. You took interest in it because guess what? That's what people who love each other do. But my goodness, somewhere along the way inside of our marriages, all of a sudden our interests and our hobbies and our needs and our job and our way of doing things becomes the priority. And you know what this feels like. You know what it feels like when the person that you have decided to spend the rest of your life with is putting their thing in front of your thing, that the thing that's a huge deal to you has somehow become not a huge deal to them. And for both men and women, by the way, it's just crushing. Because you begin to ask yourself the question, do I not matter to you enough to pay attention to the things that's a big deal to me that should be a big deal to you? Fellas, for For me and for you, think about your most prized possession. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a set of Callaways, or a car or a motorcycle or your Xbox. I don't know. What's the thing that you love? Does your wife really feel like you love her more than you love that? You and I can break down entire football plays. We can give you the history. I'm a big New England Patriots fan. I can't wait for them to win the Super Bowl. It's the greatest day of my life. I can name every player on every Super Bowl team. But man, when it comes to remembering the things that my wife's asked me to do, like that day, can I remember that? And we can laugh about it. But my goodness, is it communicating to our spouses that they matter more than the New England Patriots? Because in my heart, she does. But sometimes in my actions, it sure doesn't seem like it. Paul would say, wives, if your husband wants to come home and talk about work and tell you about thruster combustors and AC units, and you just take on the interests of others. I've sat across from wives. Be like, so what does your husband do for work? She's like, wires? Something with wires. You've been married for a long time. Wires? Wires. And we can laugh about it because it's funny, but it's not good. Paul would say that for me and for you, if we're going to have healthy marriages, that we should not look only to our own interests. We can still consider our own interests. If you like to golf, golf. But my goodness, make sure that if your wife likes something else, that you invest in that too, that not only looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. This is how we tighten the knot. Not just when we're dating, when it's easy, and the list is shorter and the stuff's more fun and there's less complications and kids don't get in the way, but every day. My wife loves the beach. The beach does not love me. I'm chubby and pale. It's not a good look. I hate the beach. I'd rather be in the mountains. But my goodness, if Ashley wants to go to the beach, we're going to the beach. Because I know that the best way for my wife to know that I love her, and that I'm willing to do something for her beyond just going to work every day and cleaning up the small messes that I make or whatever, that when I pretend like she's the most important person in the room, more important than me, our marriage thrives. Paul goes on and he says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ. In other words, if we're going to do this thing together, if we're going to have this three-stranded cord that is strong and it's tight and it can withstand all the junk. And some of you have been through some incredibly difficult junk. Infidelity and addiction and diagnoses, all kinds of stuff. And man, that cord has been put to the test. If it's going to stand the test of time, you and I have to take on the same mindset as Christ. Paul goes on and he describes what that mindset is. He says, Jesus, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. In other words, Jesus never pushed the I'm Jesus button. He never showed up, at some sporting event and was like, I'm Jesus, me and my disciples slide down, get out of the way. He didn't leverage the fact that he was Jesus to get, ahead on the list at the restaurant. He never once leveraged who he was or his role inside of the relationship to get what he wanted. Here's what this looks like for me and you. You and I, we don't get to do it with our spouse. We don't get to leverage our position or our role or our place inside of the marriage to get our way, to hit well, you know what? I've been at home all day with the kids and I'm going to leverage that button. Or you know what? Well, I'm your wife. You should have this and you should have that. Or you know what? Well, I'm your husband. You will respect me. Jesus never once leveraged his position to get his way. In fact, what Jesus chose to do instead was to make your deal and my deal a way bigger deal than his deal. Paul goes on and says that Jesus, putting us before himself even to fulfill the will of God, made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness. Some translations say that he poured himself out. He emptied himself by taking on the very nature of a servant. In other words, Jesus left it all on the field. He wasn't storing up a bunch of stuff for him. He understood that everything about him that was in him, the things that he liked, all of it, that it wasn't just for him. That in a loving relationship, you give freely, holding back nothing. Not keeping score of how long it's been since somebody took out the trash, and not keeping score on how long it's been since you've been intimate. You want to ruin your marriage? Keep score. You want to make sure that intimacy, like real relational intimacy, is ruined inside of your marriage? Keep score. Jesus instead chose to pour himself out on my behalf and on your behalf. And he was just like, you know what? You are worth it. A relationship with you is worth it. And so I will give everything that I have to create that relationship and to preserve it. And Paul is saying that that should be our mindset inside of our relationships. And my goodness, the most important relationship that you will be in this life is a relationship that you have with your husband or your wife, and the covenantal commitment that you entered into between that person and the person who died for you. Paul goes on in the last part of this verse. He says, talking about Jesus still, and being found in the appearance of a human, and being found in appearance as man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. That Jesus was willing to go so far for you that he was willing to die. And guess what? Congratulations, your marital commitment till death do us part. So just keep loving your spouse until that happens if it's really that hard. But truly, I'm not trying to make light of your marriage commitment, but what you committed to on that day is to make their deal a bigger deal than your deal, to humble yourself, to be a servant, to put the other person first until death do you part. But man, things just happen, and we hang out with people and they have opinions on this stuff. It's like, no, girl, don't do that, he doesn't deserve that. Hang out with your buddies and they start telling you about all the things that their wife does, that your wife doesn't, and we get stuck in that comparison trap. And it can happen so quickly, and little by little, this cord with 3 strands that used to be so tight begins to unravel. And maybe it broke. Maybe it broke for you. Or maybe it's like right on the verge of breaking right now in this very moment. And I just want to say to you that Paul would say, hey, it is not too late to make a change, to make a comeback, and to decide to enter into what marriage is really designed to be, which is 2 people who have decided to say, I'm going to make much of you every chance I get. I'm going to make your deal the biggest deal. I'm going to make your interests my interests. I'm going to make your needs my needs. I'm going to make sure that the things that you need to feel loved and fulfilled, that I'm going to bring it to the table, that I'm going to pour myself out. Because that's what Jesus did. That's what he taught. It's how he lived. It's what he commanded. Jesus chose to surrender his right to be right, to make right his relationship with you. Jesus could have said, you didn't earn it. You didn't earn it today. None of us earned it. You've never earned it. Well, he was pretty rude to me the other day, or she didn't do the thing I wanted her to do, so we're just going to keep score now. Jesus said, I don't keep score, and you shouldn't either. I get the privilege of sitting across from couples quite often, and it's part of kind of my what I get to do as a pastor. And the number one thing that I see time and time and time again that is blowing up marriages is one simple word, and it's selfishness. In fact, every marriage that ever fell apart because of this. Because somebody decided to make a choice that was about them and not about somebody else. They Whether it was something that happened on the outside, selfishness around them, selfishness in them, selfishness across from them, it's all connected to this. It's all connected to this. Well, I need to be right, or this is my way, or you, and the finger pointing and all of the things. And Jesus goes, hey, if you want to have a healthy marriage, if you want this thing to work, if you want to tighten the knot, Paul would say, and Jesus would say, that you have to become a humble servant. To be willing to say, you know what? I hate that song, but we're going to listen to it. I don't like the beach, but we're going to go. I think golf is stupid, but I'm glad you love it. I'm going to make your deal a bigger deal than my deal. I'm going to pick up your socks when they're left all over the floor. For 7 years, my wife and I had a reoccurring argument about socks being left all over the house, and we found out 7 years ago it wasn't me, it was the cat. And I felt so vindicated. We got a camera on the inside of the house. No lie, for 7 years, my wife was like, socks everywhere. How? And I'm like, I'm not doing this. Like, oh, okay. It was Sadie. Here's the thing, you know what? My wife, who's the greatest gift I've ever been given, she picked them up. And she would complain and she'd point them out. Of course, who wouldn't? But my wife is such a pure picture of being a humble servant. And when we get that thing right together, oh my goodness, our marriage is at its best. But when we don't, we can fight like cats and dogs, and you know what that's like. Years ago, a friend of mine, he told me that there's really two ways that we can live, that in every circumstance, we have the opportunity to make a choice. That we can either be a humble servant or we can be an entitled child. And this isn't a spectrum. It's not a sliding scale. You're either a humble servant or you are an entitled child. And my goodness, if I haven't sat across from some couples, and it breaks my heart, where you have a humble servant who is just begging an entitled child to get it together, to show up, to make their deal a bigger deal than their deal. And some of that's just because of family of origin. Some of it's connected to mental health. Some of it's connected to just bad decision making. But a lot of it is just connected to selfishness. And Jesus modeled for those of us that are followers of Jesus that we have to suspend our right to be right in order to get our marriage right and to be in right relationship with the person that God literally handmade for you and for me. It's the coolest thing you get to be a part of in this life. So you can either fight for your right or you can fight for your marriage. You can either fight for your will and your ways and the things that you want and the way that you like it. You can fight over the facts of stories that are told at dinner party tables. Sweetie, it was actually a green car. Why does it matter? No one's listening to the story anyway. Stop correcting the guy. Those little things, they add up to a bigger hole that's creating a giant problem inside of your marriage. You can either be right or you can fight for your marriage. Now, when it comes to abuse, and some of you have been in or are in abusive marriages, that is not what I'm talking about. Some of you have experienced some of the most traumatic things that any person in this life can experience. And I want you to know that it breaks my heart and it breaks God's heart. And if you got out of that and you ran, I'm so glad that you did, because the last thing you should have done was stay longer than you had to. That's not what I'm talking about here. But if you're just not happy right now, or it's just not working, it's not your time to run. Not being happy is not a reason to leave. It's a reason to fight. But not to fight with the person that God's given you to fight for, to make their deal a bigger deal than your deal, the way that Christ did for you. Very simply, marriages work best when there's two people who've decided and committed to be in a submission competition. No, you go first. No, you go first. No, you know what? You really should go play golf this weekend. No. Listen, I played golf. I'm not harping on golf too much. Let's make a new example. John, go off-roading this weekend. Oh, no, I wouldn't want to do that. I'd love to stay home. And now I'm going to make your deal a bigger deal than my deal so that we can tighten the knot, so that you know that I love you, that I love you more than I love being in the woods in my truck. Which sounds simple, but for some of us, this is the thing that's eroding the foundation of your marriage because of your unwillingness to be in a submission competition. Because you have decided that your needs and your wants are more important. And it's breaking the thing apart. And here's just what I know is that for some of you, you're doing this. You're doing whatever it takes to love and to serve your spouse, and you're getting nothing in return or very little. And here's just what is the commitment of being married. It's I will, even if you won't. And this is hard because some of you have been in I will, even if you won't marriages for a really long time, and you're exhausted and you're frustrated. And maybe you're sitting next to that person right now and you're just begging that God would do something inside of their hearts that would move them to get it together. And I'm going to do my best. Because here's what I want to remind you of. In fact, if you're married, I want you to hold your spouse's hand right now. Just for a moment, even if they're sweaty and gross, we're going to hold them. Here's what I want you to know and remind you of. Is that you guys only have so much time to love each other. And it's moving by fast. There was something about 10 years for Ashley and I that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe that it had been 10 years that we'd been married. It felt like it had been like 3 minutes. It's going by faster than I want. So don't miss it. Because, man, time is just this thing. It is the enemy of so many things in our life. And it's absolutely the enemy of your marriage if you will allow it to be. So don't miss it. Maybe skip going off-roading or going to the golf course because guess what? You only have so much time to love each other. You only have so much time to pick up the dirty socks or to make a meal you don't want to make. You only have so much time to not go to the golf course and to go listen to a band that you literally could care less about. But it will be worth it when you make their deal a bigger deal than yours. Stop being so darn selfish. Stop getting your advice from Instagram for the love of God. You laugh. I've sat across from couples that have talked more to ChatGPT in the last 3 months about their marriage than they've talked to their literal spouse. It is driving me nuts. Stop. God designed marriage. It's his creation for you. So stop it. It's here. It is in God's word how to make this thing work, and you think it's broken, but it's broken because you're using it wrong. When we don't do marriage God's way, it's like trying to make lasagna in a toaster. It is messy and gross. Stop. Stop being selfish. Start serving the way that Christ has loved and served you. The blueprint is here. It's here. A couple years ago, I was officiating a wedding, and the groom, who was like 23 or 24 years old, young guy, awesome dude. He said, hey, would it be okay if I read my vows to you? They were, as a couple, writing their vows. I said, sure. So he sends them to me, and I read them. And this line in his vows really stood out to me. It was like, I was like, oh, this is very specific. I want to understand more about that. This is what was in his vows. He said, I commit to treat you like you are the most important person in every room. I was like, that's pretty wise for a 24-year-old dude. I commit to treat you like you were the most important person in every room. And this big, long list of vows, this one stood out to me. I remember asking him, I was like, hey, where did that one come from? He said, well, a few years ago, my mom lost my dad. And they had a little bit of a tense marriage, and I didn't really know how tense it was. He said, but after my dad passed away, my mom was just a wreck. For 3 reasons. 1, she thought she had way more time to love him. 2, she'd fallen out of the habit of making his deal a bigger deal than her deal. She became so self-focused on the things that she wanted and the things that she needed. And it began to pull them further and further and further apart. She said, all the things that used to drive me nuts about your dad haunt me because I miss them. She said, I wish, number 3, that I had treated your dad like he was the most important person in the room, because now he's not in it. And so for this 24-year-old dude, he was like, I never want to forget to treat my wife the way that I'm going to treat her on the day that we get married, where everybody's going to stand up and we're going to be in awe. He's like, I want to never not do that. I want to never forget to make her deal a bigger deal than my deal, because I don't want to feel what my mom feels today. So, falling in love requires attraction. And it does, and I hope you're still attracted to your spouse. All of that matters. It's so important. But my goodness, the thing that's more important is that you have a plan and that you're committed to it. Because falling in love requires attraction, but staying in love requires right action. And you may say, John, you don't know my situation. You don't know what I'm going through. You don't understand. And you know what? You're right. I don't. But here's the promise of today. And then we'll pray and we'll wrap up. The promise of today is this. I don't know what is going on in your marriage. It really doesn't matter all that much. Because here's what I know is that if the tomb is empty, and I believe that it is, anything is possible. That if Jesus was who he said he was, that if he really died and he really walked out of that tomb, and I believe that he did, then guess what? Your marriage, it's going to be okay. There's hope on the other side of today. There's hope on the other side of tomorrow, but it's going to require you to stop being so selfish and to choose to be in a submission competition with your spouse, even if they won't. And when you do, it will be worth it, because it will make you more like your King, King Jesus. Let me pray for you. Jesus, I'm so incredibly grateful for my wife. She's such a gift to me. God, our marriage is not perfect, and you know that. But God, we're not perfect. And yet you loved us and you chose us, and you made our deal a bigger deal than your deal. You sent your son to die on our behalf so that we could have right relationship. God, I ask that today that this message would challenge the people it's meant to challenge, to encourage the people that it's supposed to encourage. God, for the people that are single in the room that are considering getting married, God, would this inspire them to not only want to be married, God, but to begin to view the people that they may end up marrying through a different lens, and maybe ask themselves the question, is this person going to want to be in a submission competition with me? God, I am so glad that you decided to send your son to have a right relationship with me and to model what it looks like to love others well. God, would you help me do that in my marriage? And help all of us that are sitting in the room who are married to do it as well. We need your help. Would you help us do it? It's in your name we pray. Amen.